Well, hello everyone, welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. I'm really hoping you're going to enjoy this one because it's not really going to be a tutorial of any sort. I just had to replant this pear tree because, as you saw, it died. If you followed the death troubleshooting guide, you'll know that this tree is definitely dead. And so we need to replace this before we get too far into our growing season. I guess if there's one bit of information I can give you all, that if you have a tree that dies and you want to replant it, make sure that you replant the tree as fast as possible. You do not want to transplant when the tree is coming out of dormancy too very much, because there's so much stress already put on the tree from not being in native soil that it can spread its roots throughout. It's in a really close quarters pot. It's definitely far too small of a pot for this much growth. And so we really do need to get this thing transplanted. So what we're going to do is we're just going to transplant this right now in real time, because I've got to get this thing in the ground. It's a shame too, because this tree was doing really well. It was growing very well in its home. But as we talked about in the troubleshooting guide, the rabbits had other plans. The root system was very healthy. I want to make sure that the hole is 2 times as wide as the root ball and about 2 times as deep. And then what we want to do is, as we always do, we're going to go in and we want to spoke the hole. Spoking basically just means that we are going to create little notches in the side of the hole here that can prevent the tree from just keeping spiraling around like it is in the pot. We got pretty good loose soil. Even though it's heavy clay, having that compost mulched on top for a good year has really broken up that clay. And you'll see that even though there's a good amount of clay, there's also a really good amount of organic matter in there, and it does compact, but it also breaks up fairly well too. So it's getting there. It's not perfect, but it's still getting there. All right, we're ready to plant. So let's get this tree removed here. And we're going to untangle some of these roots. Want to make sure that if there are roots that are really wired around like this, that you untangle them. That's only going to keep them going in a circular motion. It's almost like muscle memory, if you will. The muscle memory of the roots basically says that there's a barrier here and it needs to continue going around and around. Whereas if we break these up, being careful not to rip the roots and damage the roots, obviously, we're going to break that memory and help it to move throughout the soil a little better. All right, and there we go. Now, ideally, we want the tree to be at soil level or even slightly above soil level. This here is a graft point, and that graft point's where basically the selected tree, which would be the Moonglow Pear. We want this Moonglow Pear to be semi-dwarf. So it was grafted to a semi-dwarf rootstock. You never want to bury soil past the rootstock point, because what that can do is the tree, the Moonglow Pear, can actually send down roots to then create its own root system, which will then override the rootstock. Or what can happen is the rootstock can rot out, causing there to be rot throughout the trunk, because the rootstock here is it's got open flesh here where it was grafted on, and so you want to make sure that that's not under soil, otherwise that could start to rot as well. So keeping a really good amount of soil existing above soil level from the original pot is important. Not a lot, but it's definitely important to have that. And then also when you mulch, you want to make sure that you don't mulch very high up here either, because it could rot out that graft point. So let's get this buried in and we're gonna be ready to give it a good soak. Another thing you want to make sure of that I'm noticing here is, as I'm backfilling, the tree is a little on the lopsided side. So it has a tendency to lean. You want to make sure you fix that lean as much as possible, keep it growing upright, because if it's growing like this and you transplant it, well, that's not going to be very good for its structural integrity when it starts bearing fruit. So you want to make sure that you keep the tree as level as possible. That way it supports the most amount of weight, because the center of gravity should be directly in a line right down. If it's over in one direction, it's going to start leaning and tipping, and that's when you have it breaking under high winds or high fruit yields. So just some things to keep in mind. And the final thing that you want to do is when you're backfilling, you want to make sure that you actually step down the soil. This is something that I see so many people forgetting to do, and it is really an important component to having a successful tree take root. There's a lot of air gaps when you backfill like the way I did, with clumps and rocks and things like that. You know, you don't want to backfill with pure compost, because basically that is essentially fertilizing the tree. You want to use the native soil with only slight amounts of compost mixed in, just to amend the overall texture of the soil, but not create a whole new growing environment for it. Because, well, if your soil's not great outside of the hole, it's not going to be encouraged to leave the hole if the conditions are worse. So I always suggest using mostly native soil in your backfill. And then what you want to do is you want to step down the soil. This is a very important step, because you're taking all those giant air gaps out. You're actually removing those larger air gaps that are going to cause the root to not want to develop as well. You want to step that down all around the base of the tree, because over time, as you compost, the worms are going to come up and they're going to re-loosen the soil, but they're going to re-loosen it to a much more natural structure. What I just did was I basically damaged the soil structure and really left a lot of air gaps by opening it up the way I did. But that's the only way you can obviously dig a hole. So you want to just press that all back down and then let nature loosen the soil back to its original state. But very, very important to compress that soil down with your foot. Not super hard, but just a gentle step. You know, body weight is going to help compress that down and help to remove those air gaps. So there you go, out with the old, in with the new. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I'm going to simply come in here and I'm going to prune. Now, obviously it's always best to prune when the tree is still dormant, because it's going to cause the least amount of shock on the tree. But I got to come in here and I've got to prune some of this height off. It's far too high, and I got to encourage some more lower lateral growth, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to prune about 5 to 7 inches off these top growth points here, and that way it's really going to encourage some better lower growth. It's going to be more, it's going to have a lower center of gravity. It's also going to be able to host more fruit, because these are really long, very top heavy branches. So I hope you all enjoyed. The last thing I'm going to do is just give it a really good watering. We're going to water about 2 gallons a week, and we're going to water about every other day, and that's really going to make sure that it's doing well. As the summer approaches, we're probably going to water more like 5 gallons a week, but we're going to be watering maybe only once a week or so when that season, when that warm season comes, because you don't want to water on a very consistent basis when it's very hot, because it can overstress the tree. So we're going to water less, especially because there's also a lot of water in the soil too. There's a lot of groundwater from the spring melts. So I don't need to water as much. This is just supplemental watering, maybe every other day or so. I'm going to add up to about 2 gallons a week. And then once the heat of summer comes, like I said, 5 gallons once a week. And that's going to really help the tree to cope with stress, and it's going to do wonderful. In 2 months, we're going to follow back up with some fertilizer. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. As always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. I hope you all enjoyed. Like this video, share it with your friends if you think they'd enjoy it. I'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye.